In this video, I'm going to talk about rules and why they're really important, but not set in stone. So if there's one thing that we, as wargamers, either you're just getting into wargaming or you've been doing it for a while, there's one thing that we really have to deal with pretty much every time that we sit down to play, it's rules. The games that we play, no matter what kind of miniatures game that we, generally enjoy and like to play with our friends or our local group or whatever, these things are generally referred to as rule sets. That's the kind of shorthand for the actual game itself, not the story or the fluff, not the hobby portion of it, the painting, the building, all that kind of stuff. But the rule set is the code, to use a computer sort of term, that kind of runs the game. And it is something that we all have to be very aware of if we want to learn the game. There's only so many different ways to play miniatures games. There's always similarities. Normally, you need to hit a certain target number or above it or below it to complete a task, to shoot a bad guy or to throw a knife or to block a shot or something like that. There's usually dice involved. There's usually ranges involved. There's all kinds of things that almost all rule sets have in common. So once you've learned one rule set, you have a tendency to be able to a little bit more quickly pick up a different rule set. Now, there are many rule sets out there that are very similar, and there are other ones that are quite a bit different than anything that you might be used to. Some people really enjoy chasing after the different. They really like this is very different than any other rule set out there, and it's very interesting. And sometimes people even look at it from almost a academic standpoint of like, I really want to play this game because it's so different than everything else that's out there. There's also a lot of people who, frequently, sometimes myself, who enjoy a game because it is just a bit better than this other game that they like. It's not a lot different. There's a lot in common, but there's little tweaks here and there that make this game, game A, better than game B, and so therefore I'm going to now start playing game A, that kind of thing. Everybody's got their own different likes and dislikes of rule sets. Everybody has different ideas about the way that the games are designed and are played. And that's really one of the interesting things about tabletop gaming, is that we have complete control over our rule sets. Now, if you're going to be playing in some sort of competition, some sort of tournament, some sort of competitive organized play, then you can't be playing a different rule set or even a different version of a rule set or even a different sort of tweak on a rule set than your opponent. You need to be on the same page, you and your opponent, when you're playing in some sort of tournament. I would say you have to be on the same page in any situation where you're playing against an opponent. You both need to be playing the same rule set. One of you can't be playing 40K 3rd edition and one of you is playing 7th edition. That's just not going to work out in most situations. So understand that. But specifically in organized play, you as the player generally don't have any control over the rule set. The person who is organizing the tournament or the organizing whatever this event is, they're the ones that have control over the rule set. Very frequently, they will use kind of the base rule set that the company who made the game has put out. Sometimes they will tweak things certain ways to make it better or easier or something like that, or quicker for tournament play, for organized play, whatever. But that's the thing that you and everybody else who's playing in the event have to agree on, that you're going to use the rule set that has been laid down by the event organizers. Great. But for those of us who don't play in organized play, like to play at home or at clubs or at stores sometimes with friends, we have a lot more leeway than you do in organized stuff, and we have a lot more leeway than you do in video games. In video games, the rules are the rules. There are mods that you can put on PC games. Sometimes you can go into certain games will make it so that you can change settings here and there to make the overall multiplayer gameplay a little bit different than the base normal way that the game is played. But for the most part, especially if you don't know how to program, you're not changing anything. If this says this is the way the game is played, then that's the way that you play it, because you're not really in control of the overall rule set, as it were. When you're playing a video game, the computer is, and it takes care of all of that stuff for you, and that's one of the benefits for video games. But for those of us who like to kind of color outside the lines, maybe tinker a little bit. Tabletop games are really where it's at. As long as you and your opponent, or opponents, depending on how many people are playing, as long as you all agree, you can change rules, you can add rules, you can remove rules. You have all the options in the world to be able to play the game in the style that you want to have more fun with the people that you're playing with. The whole point of non-organized play generally is to have fun. And if you have had fun, then you've won. I've said that a bunch of times, and I think it's really important to understand when you are playing non-competitively, you're playing for fun. If you had fun, great, everybody won. That's how it works. And sometimes that means changing some of the rules. Amongst the people that I play Kill Team with around my area, we pretty much always skip the scout phase. The scout phase happens, I think, it's usually either after deployment or before deployment. I forget exactly because we don't play it, so I kind of forget. But it is this extra phase where you can do some sort of stuff that has to do with like intelligence, like, oh, I might be able to bomb this piece of terrain, so people will be hurt if they go by it. Secretly, I can bomb that piece of terrain. Booby trap almost, I could say I could, there's all kinds of little things. There's like 6 different choices, and each opponent in secrecy picks one, and then you do it, and some stuff happens, and sometimes it's vaguely interesting. It's kind of not, at least in my opinion, and amongst the friends that I play with around here, it's not a great addition to the game. Games Workshop themselves actually doesn't use it in their organized play. They just skip over the scout phase as well. At least they were going to at Adepticon 2020, and I was looking at the Adepticon 2020 rules for Kill Team tournaments. So, that's just a house rule where you just go, nah, we're just going to delete that rule. It's not useful to us. We're not going to do it. But you can also change rules as well. Back in the day, I had some friends I played 40K with, and we had house ruled the seize the initiative kind of rule. In the seize the initiative in 40K, which still to this day is the way it works, if you lose initiative and you don't get to go first, you can roll a d6 to try to seize initiative. If you get a 6, then you get to go first, and the person who actually won the initiative does not. Now, why you'd ever, like almost always you want to go first, so why you'd ever be like, nah, I don't really feel like seizing the initiative, it's pretty rare. Most times you want to. So rather than just making it automatic every time someone's going to seize the initiative, we made it that if you seize the initiative, great. If you rolled a 6, you got the initiative. But if you rolled a 1, then it was a negative, and I forget exactly what we did, but it was basically something that was not going to be good for you. So you were taking a risk. It was there was no risk to trying to seize the initiative, and we thought it was important to add a little bit of risk because it made the game a little bit more interesting. There's a lot of little house rules like that allow you as a player to be able to, or as a group of players, to be able to make the game a little bit more interesting, and it doesn't take a lot of work. Again, if you're playing video games and you want to change the rules, you're going to probably have to mod the software in some fashion, and that's, well, I can't do it. I mean, I'm not saying I'm a genius, but I'm just saying that it's a very difficult thing to do because you have to, if you can even get access to the code, write a mod, there's all kinds of stuff that goes on there. It's not something that every general person who wants to play a video game has access to being able to do. But pretty much anybody can start to tinker with the rules on a tabletop game, specifically in wargaming. I have had games before where we've just decided, well, let's just make it so that one side has just a little bit more points. Like, I really want to bring this guy onto the table, but if I build this list, I'm 17 points over the point level that we agreed on. And as long as both players are like, yeah, that's cool, but it's fine by me, then, it's going to be a more interesting game potentially because you're going to see, well, like, what does that big unit do when confronted against this and that and all that kind of stuff. And you wouldn't have been able to do it if you were going to be completely beholden directly to, we are playing a 1,500 point game. The benefit to being able to tweak and modify things is that it allows you to, for lack of a better term, play test. If you want to just change a rule and see how it works out, by the end of the game, you'll pretty much know. And maybe it would be helpful if you did it multiple times to be really sure. And maybe there's going to be times when all of a sudden something's going to sneak in. It seemed like it was good until this particular thing happened, and all of a sudden this new rule that you've come up with or modified or whatever is all of a sudden broken. That's what playtesting is for. But it's very simple to just be able to start tweaking and twisting and see what you get, and then be able to go forward from there. In the past, I've tried to bring in specific models that are not for this game. So there's no stats for this particular model. Maybe it's like a big robot or a giant or something like that comes in on turn 3, and now the two players who have been playing against each other now have to fight off this third foe that is very big and powerful and that kind of stuff. Well, if there's no rules for it, if there's no stats for it, then what do? Then what you do is you try to find something that's close to it, at least something that you feel is close to it that might be within that game. Like if there's some sort of dragon monster in that game, but you're trying to bring in this other thing, then you start with that as your base. And you say, well, the dragon monster stats are thus, and so therefore I'm going to change this, and this looks like he's got a gun, so therefore he needs a range attack, so I'll take this. And you can kind of just cobble stuff together and try it out. And then when you start to play, you can see if it's way overpowered, way underpowered, all that kind of stuff, and then go from there. And it's a lot of fun to sort of tinker with that stuff. It makes the games more interesting. Just playing the same sort of scenarios over and over again, especially amongst maybe a smaller group of people that you play with in your club or whatever in your area. Making those modifications can really give you more inspiration to keep playing and to keep playing the same game and to keep kind of having a good time with it without having to completely start a new different type of game or a new different type of army. It really can help spur you along to make it so that you really enjoy the gaming a little bit more because you're becoming creative in the actual act of kind of tweaking and modifying and becoming a rules writer yourself. And of course, there are also rules within the hobby. Now, the rules that you hear amongst painters and builders and all that kind of stuff, those are all very quickly and easily meant to be broken. Obviously, you don't want to try to paint with, I don't know, motor oil or something like that, unless maybe it works. You never know. But that's kind of how things happen in the hobby. You start off by learning, well, first you prime, and then you do this, and then you do that, and then you edge highlight, and then you do that, and whatever. And then you start to see, well, what if I use this instead? What if I do this instead? What if I decide I don't like this color scheme at all that everyone always seems to go with, and I want my dry brush, instead of just to be a lighter version of the base color, I want it to be a completely different color and see how that looks. It's much easier to do that kind of stuff specifically in the hobby because you are doing it predominantly by yourself. You're sitting there in your hobby space and you're looking at this model and you're like, well, normally at this point would come the dry brush. And then you would do maybe the wash to deaden it down, but I'm going to do the wash first and then dry brush over the top of it and see how it goes. There are really generally actually no rules per se in the hobby, in the actual painting, building, all that kind of stuff. You can always modify and convert the figures that you are playing with to make them look the way that you want, and that's very cool. But the rules really in the hobby portion are a bit different. They're usually more rules of thumb, for lack of a better term, where you can say this is generally what you should do, but it's always a good idea to try to, kind of move out and to see what other things that you can do within the hobby to make your pieces really look your own. So we live in a society made of rules, and that's understandable. It keeps us safe and all that kind of stuff. Hopefully you're staying safe and keeping out of the outdoors and out of public and things like that. Hopefully you're able to hashtag shelter and hobby and share that stuff on Instagram and get some really cool hobby stuff done during this time. Because when we're done with all of this and the isolation and we get to go back and start playing some games again, definitely take a look at the rules of the game that you like to play with your friends and see what kind of ways you can tweak things and change things. And it may be as simple as pulling out a rule because you just find it to be clunky. It may be as simple as adding a rule because you want to have this extra step. Or it may be modifying the rules as they are now to see what you can do with them to make the game more interesting to you and your friends. Modification on all these things is easy, it's free, and it can make the game a lot more fun for you and your pals.
1, 2, 3, 4.